I have a friend getting married. Well, at this point, I think it's probably fair to say two friends. And in addition to a couple items off the registry, I want to make for them this chainmail scrubbing pad. I find it to be a very useful addition to kind of kitchenware. Not quite as important and useful as like a stainless steel scouring pad, but it serves a different function than this scouring pad. For something kind of like this, which is the remnants after making yogurt, if I scrub it, and this will even happen with water, not quite as bad, with the scouring pad, it gets all in here, and washing this off can be a real kind of pain. But if I use this, yeah, stuff still sticks to it, but washing it off can go a lot quicker. And so that's what I like to use this stainless steel pad for, is stuff that is like big and chunky and is kind of is annoying and gets inside one of these, and a rag has issues with. And this isn't maybe the best example. Since I have the stainless steel scouring, or since I have the chainmail scouring pad, I use it for the milk, but a rag could probably do okay, and it isn't terrible for this. But for like oatmeal pots or rice or just kind of other stuff, I find this very useful as something which can clean it out and be very easy to rinse out. It's not quite as aggressive as this, but even with that, it's good to get like the big chunks off, and then I can maybe go and clean up the details with the finer, more aggressive scouring pad. I use 18 gauge 1/4 inch ID stainless steel rings. You could use a variety of different ring sizes and gauges for different effects on the scrubbing. I imagine you could also use copper and possibly some other metals and still have a very good result. I use a European 4-in-1 style of chainmail for this. I think I chose to use that because that's what I had most experience making previously. And also that's what the previous stainless steel scrubber I was using that inspired me to make this used. And I think that's just a pretty common weave for a lot of this type of thing. I imagine you could use other, again, for kind of a different type of effect that you're going for with the chainmail. Of whether you want this to be how tight versus how loose it is. I like this amount, but I could see maybe going to a European 6-in-1 for a much tighter weave that is very kind of, I don't know, not as loose as this. I often find the first, as I start out one of these, it can be pretty tricky getting it to work. Getting everything aligned and not messed up. But once you get a couple out, you can start building it out. Once you get a little bit of structure, which I think I have now, it gets a lot easier, and you're less likely to make mistakes because it wants, when you kind of lay it on the table, it wants to lay down kind of in the pattern, whereas previously, kind of when I first was starting, there's no like consistent pattern that it wants to lay down in, so you have to be really careful to make sure that you create that pattern. Though the one really nice thing about working with chainmail, though, it is a lot slower than knitting with cloth. I kind of consider it like knitting with metal. If you do make a mistake and you don't catch it right away, it's oftentimes a lot easier to kind of go into the middle of a piece or kind of create some sort of... You can get back into the middle without having to undo everything you've done since making the mistake, like if you're knitting with string. So it's... There's a... Oh, that's one of the really frustrating things when you make mistake knitting, that while it's not great to make a mistake when you're doing chainmail, at least you don't have to, most times, undo everything. Or even if you do have to kind of create a path back into the mistake, you get to save what's on either side. You can just kind of create a path in, even if you have to undo quite a bit. But it never gets completely wanting to lay down nicely. You can always kind of mess it up. But once you have some structure in it, works reasonably well. I like to make these in groups, where I make up enough to do one area to the exact number, and then I will like weave that all in, and then I'll make up another set of them. I think it's more efficient than doing them individually, and there's something, because this is a pretty boring, laborious task, counting them out and building patterns with them kind of is what makes it fun for me. The pliers I use are jewelry pliers, which I bought for making chainmail, and kind of the benefits of them is that they have flat faces, so they don't have like a serrated face that mark up the aluminum rings. I think a serrated face would be fine with these stainless steel rings, but previously when I was making chainmail, I was using aluminum and didn't want to mark them up with a serrated face. But the really important thing for making large amounts is having the wide, comfy, ergonomic, they're marketed as, grips on the pliers, rather than just having like a thin covering over the metal thing. Because you're using them so frequently, they can really kind of damage your hands. Though I think having just a pair of regular pliers without the ergonomic grips on them for something this size is probably okay, as long as you aren't planning to do it all in one shot. One of the things I was worried about when I initially made the one that we've been using for my family, 3.5 years ago, was that because these rings are, well, they don't come together perfectly. There's kind of a little bit of a gap, and there's just something, it just isn't perfectly put together because, well, this is handmade, and I'm not super good at this, and these rings maybe even aren't the best for that exactly, is that they would come off, and like I'd lose rings, and that hasn't been the case. Well, I've lost 2 or 3 rings from this one. I've had 2 or 3 come off, but haven't actually lost them. They've just ended up in the sink drainer. And maybe that's because we use this little sink catcher to catch crud, which is something that basically anytime we'd be using this on cruddier stuff, we would be using that, or even they just end up in the sink or elsewhere around the counters. They haven't always come off when I'm dumping it out. But I just grab pliers and put it back on. It's not that big of a deal, and even if I did lose 1 or 2, I have spare rings, and you'd probably have spare rings, though I'm not giving any with the gift I'm giving. But in general, this is lower quality than the commercial one I was inspired by, and it also would estimate this has so far taken me about 2 hours to make this, which, like, as a gift for a friend, that's perfectly fine, but it just, and I don't know how much the commercial ones cost. I haven't looked that up, but it's probably not too much, I can't imagine. But one of the things I've been doing kind of in order to, and I realize I actually haven't done it completely, I only did it on one side on this one, is that on this kind of the corners, I actually don't have a single ring. I have this, just kind of this ring, and I skip the kind of additional closed ring on the corners of this, and that's just so that you only have you don't have any rings that only have one connection. All of them have at least a connection to 2 other rings. So to kind of try to prevent them from coming off. And you'll notice that this one I made is considerably smaller than the one we use at home. And this is even, I think, a little bit bigger than strictly necessary, but this one is, actually it's a little bit bigger than I really want. It can actually get in my way sometimes when I'm scrubbing out a pot. It's like I really, even though I have pretty big hands, I really only need it to cover my fingers, which this one does. I don't need it quite this large because there's just extra material there that I'm getting used to. So it's quicker to make and uses less rings, so I still have more, and I even have more of these than when I bought them. More to make more of these as gifts in the future.